Good people, my goodness, what a cool hallway here at Hyte.
I love
Michael,
it.
There's some new cooling components. I'm sure you're gonna love
I
it.
see
So
them
why
there.
don't you tell us all about it?
What about the RGB? You got to tell us about that, but
Yes.
later in the video?
Yes,
All
but
right.
first, huge thanks to our sponsors for making this trip possible. THICC, MSI, Cluemaster, and Hyte THICC.
Without them, this trip wouldn't have been possible at all. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the THICC Q60 AIO. And why is it called THICC? Well, you probably have already guessed it. It has a 52 millimeter thick radiator. That basically gives it the same thickness footprint as a standard radiator in a push-pull configuration. But anyways, Hyte's direction for this was to compete directly with 360 millimeter AIOs that were sporting the THICC Gen 8 pump. So basically what almost everybody on the market is using right now. And according to the numbers that they gave us, that's exactly what they are achieving. I'm going to talk about the fans in a little bit, but the elephant in the room here is this thing that's hanging off of the pump. What is that? What is that? This is not a smartphone. It's the closest thing because it's got a quad-core ARM processor and 2 gigs of memory. The idea here is to have a 720p LCD that displays pretty much anything that you want. Right now, there's a couple widgets that I'm going to show you, and it's quite adaptable. But anyways, the other thing that you're going to see is that there is illumination on the back. So what they have back there is individual LEDs that are meant to illuminate your build a little bit more. Now, I'm going to try to move this. If it falls apart, I'm really sorry, Hyte. This is a very, very early engineering sample, and supposedly just the fact that it's here in this form is almost a small miracle. But anyway, so what you can actually do is move this around laterally, like so, move it like this, and illuminate different parts of your build, or basically have this pointing towards you wherever you are on your desk setup. It's actually pretty cool, but there are a couple of sacrifices. First of all, I'm going to try and move this aside just a little bit. There we go. You can actually see that at the pump head, the tubes, even though they are very, very thick, they cannot actually be rotated, and that could cause some major problems for some builds. The other thing that I noticed is that the tubes here are so thick and extremely hard to bend. That's another problem that's caused by the fact that Hyte is running a bunch of cabling through these in an effort to keep the cable mess to a minimum. So let's talk about that software too. This is very, very beta, but is actually quite intuitive. So on this side of the screen over here, what you have is a back and a front. This is basically a layer type system. So your front would be all of these things like your clock, right there, your reminders, and this is very, very basic right now. They're promising us that there's going to be a bunch more. There's some media that you can put and weather. And then if you look at what happens if I put clock and the back as this crazy pattern, there you go. And this is going to be a lot more customizable as it moves away from the beta stage. They're still many months away from releasing this thing, but the heart of this AIO is really the fans. Now about those fans, those are the THICC, again, the THICC FT12, and everything Hyte is doing here is basically, I guess, like sumo size. So these fans are 32 millimeters thick. And what they're going for here is, of course, that typical balance between air pressure and airflow. But the main problem that they were having is the fact that this radiator that they're trying to cool is so thick. And what that means is that they needed to optimize a little bit more for static pressure. So what you're eventually going to see with these fans is that they might have a lower airflow amount, especially when it comes to airflow versus RPM, but the static pressure for them with a 32 millimeter thickness should technically be completely off the charts. Now the other thing that you're going to see here, and I know a couple of you are probably going to ask this, is that they're running this in pull configuration, which is probably the worst possible performance configuration for a massive radiator like this. That's because, according to Hyte, this is just the direction of airflow that seems to benefit GPU cooling a little bit more in this case. The other thing about the fans is, guess what? Along with everybody and their mother at this show, they're going with a pogo pin design that connects magnetically. Now you might be saying, whoop-de-doo about that, but the nice thing is that they basically don't move around and they're not infringing on any patents. The last thing I really need to mention about this is, as you're seeing the B-roll, you're going to see these fans are like pretty rough around the edges. That's because they're using a liquid crystal polymer, and somebody decided to, guess what? Paint the liquid crystal polymer. That's a bad freaking idea. So guess what? Because the humidity here in Taipei, they're flaking even worse than my dandruff. So anyways, The other thing that I needed to mention about these is how you actually connect them. So what you have is an end connector that can go either direction. So it's a right angle connector. And I do want to mention that a right angle connector is so much better than some of the other ones that we're seeing, especially Corsair's that comes out basically like a straight USB. That makes cable routing a freaking nightmare. So this one, it just clips on in this direction. So you can actually see that the magnet rejected me. Something that I usually get when I'm at the bars anyways. And then what you have after that is a really nicely braided and very, very malleable connector that goes almost into a USB connector. Now this, yes, the head here is USB, but Hyte doesn't want you to use it just as like a regular USB connector. So what they've done is they've done a notching design on it, because while it is USB-C, it carries their proprietary signal only. This isn't like a USB power cable or anything else. On the positive side, this type of system does carry up to 53 watts. So you can power a maximum of 6 fans together or 10 all together in your system. And it's a pretty good design. Anyways, you probably saw this behind me. This is the Key TKL. Dimitri, take it away. Here he comes.
The Key TKL for Hyte is a brand new product. It is quite in the early stages, but check this out. It's got a very interesting design. You know, the exterior is this translucent, transparent shell that is full of RGB. They are of course going to fill in all the specs in terms of hot swappable. Double shell PBT keycaps. They're going to be using looped switches. Not sure which looped switches they'll be using, but looped is always better than none. Anyway, we do have this like cigarette lighter, this cigar-like dual scroll wheel that is actually, you know, it looks weird, but it's convenient and actually functional. So you're doing your walls, you're doing stuff, and instead of reaching in for the tiny little knob that's normally found in the corner somewhere that is not very accessible, we have these massive scroll wheels that you can remap to something else and be actually useful. The little media controls at the bottom have nice clickiness to them, but I think the whole idea is this Hyte form factor of the keyboard, introducing more RGB into your space. And personally, not a huge fan of this design. Maybe with a different color layout and perhaps, you know, with some different materials for the translucent, but this isn't final yet. Just kind of exploring the area of keyboard RGB. So let me know what you think of the Key TKL. Love the name, not so much the product yet. Man, who knew Hyte as like a case company, you know, they are maybe introducing a keyboard in a while, are going to be dabbling in RGB software control, but not just any software control. This is hardware, Nexus universal hardware control, meaning we have, look over here. This isn't a Hyte product at all. This is the Nanoleaf connected wirelessly to our PC. If we go over here, this is the Digma Raise keyboard, the ergonomic dual split configuration. Right now there's something wrong with it, so it's not working, but we have a Razer mouse. We have a Mountain Everest Max keyboard. We have, I'm not sure, somebody else's mouse pad. We have IQ connected at the back over here, the IQ towers. We have more Philips Hue light bulbs. So in this light configuration, now when we look inside the enclosure, we have Corsair IQ, we have ROG massive RTX, you know, graphics cards. We have some memory over there. We have fans. We have even a Lianli streamer cable. All that is controlled by the universal hardware control inside the Nexus software. And I didn't think that was even possible, but it seems like it is, and that would remove the whole annoyance of needing to download Razer Synapse, IQ software, blah blah blah, or Armory Sync software, and all the rest just for RGB. And from the looks of it, they're introducing a mapping zone that allows you to say, you know, for this is the element for the mouse that will be displayed in certain map in color. I'll show you that later. And that is the way to go for the future lighting control, especially when we are dealing with 1,000 different devices with all different RGB software. So when we look inside the Nexus software, this is the mapping that I'm talking about. And it's very important because right now we're sampling all the lighting configuration from our display. And that's cool because I can move things around. So I can move the RGB hallway that we walked through in the beginning because it's sampling right now from this point to this point. And that's a really unique way because you can condense the gradient or you can expand it based on your configuration and visualization that's happening over here, which is absolutely, it's new. too, right? It's not just you selecting the Razer Mamba Elite and giving it like a specific RGB cycling effect, for example. You can select all these effects. Right now, you can see this little configuration over here with all types of effects, and that's your system. So this is the PC right now, and that's kind of the challenge that they're trying to experiment with, because how do you control the IQ fans versus the ROG graphics card independently when you're talking about the mapping control? And so I find that if you're trying to navigate this whole RGB movement within a room, it becomes much easier when you're talking about the map. But when you're trying to do something a little bit more specific and miniaturized, like inside your PC with RAM, the ROG, the fans, the streaming cable, that's when things become a little bit more challenging. But they're aware of this configuration sort of obstacle, and they're working on it. So for example, we can animate. Right now, we're in the animation, and again, we're talking about the map. So we're no longer sampling the screen. I can go into different color shifting. I can go color bounce. So everything that you see in this room, whenever there's a color that enters that mapping box for a certain device, it will be illuminated, but it's also illuminated in that gradient, which is so cool. And you can also disable certain devices within the software. So if you're looking to, let's say, remove a certain device from the device manager and you don't want the RGB of that device to be interacting with the Nexus, that is possible to do in the software. And right now, there are more than 20 devices that are currently being supported by the Nexus software. And this is like really early stages of development. And it supports plenty of RGB popular devices, and you know, you might encounter some difficulty of certain RGB devices with like Aura Sync that might have a few layers that you cannot get access to, but you can always maybe use the original software and have the rest being controlled, especially in the room environment where we have so many different RGB things. You don't want 7 different controls, apps. And I feel like Nexus is actually solving a real issue in the RGB space, you know? All right, guys, the Hyte software implementation. Can't wait to see the final result. Love this hallway. Mike, what do you think of the cooling?
The AIO looks amazing, just very, very beta at this point in time. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this content. I'm Mike.
I'm Dmitry, and we'll see you in the next video.
Have a good one, guys.